You're all very welcome. Good morning. My name is Kate McCauley and I'm the Chief Executive here at Housing Rights. I should say before we start, we're going to be showing slides throughout the presentation. It's funny how quickly you forget how to do online meetings now that we've kind of moved back to having conferences and seminars in real life. So it took me a while to remember. So if you're like me, you need to go up and hit the view button at the side and select active speaker. So you want to really go, instead of standard, you want to go side by side gallery. You want the focus to be on the speaker so that you can see the slides and the speaker today, because we have some great speakers coming up. We're really pleased to be hosting this morning's seminar with the Nationwide Foundation. And really the focus of today over the next hour is to focus on the Tenant Voice programme, which has been strengthening the voice of private tenants across the UK since 2019. And we're really delighted, both ourselves at Housing Rights and the Nationwide Foundation, to have so many of you join the call this morning. I'd particularly like to welcome any tenants who are on the call and those who might be joining us from outside of the housing sector specifically, because we feel very strongly that the learning from this work that's happening in our sector, both in Northern Ireland and across the UK, is really important to anyone who's invested in civic voice and doing the hard work that exists to empower excluded voices. So over the next hour, you'll hear from Joshua Davies, who is the Programme Manager at the Nationwide Foundation, who will give you a bit of a brief introduction to the Tenant Voice programme, what it is, what it's been about, and what the nature of the work that's been funded up under the programme has been. Then you'll hear from Jenny and Brigida, who are two private tenants who have been involved in the Renters' Voice project, which is a project that's been funded under the programme by the Foundation and supported by Housing Rights here in Belfast. And then Josh will come back on to share some of the headline learning that the programme has uncovered working with the grantees about the nature of the work to strengthen tenant voice. And then we'll open for questions and discussion with all of you. So we're really keen to have your involvement. And if you have any questions, please, you can either put them in the chat box or you can raise your hand and I'll come to you. But before we do, I suppose it'd be remiss of me not to make some brief introductory remarks about why this work is so important. In Northern Ireland, the latest census results, which were published just before Christmas, show that twice the share of households are now living in the private rented sector in Northern Ireland compared to 20 years ago. Private renters are up from 1 in 10 of the population here to 1 in 5. And with this growth in private renting, the spotlight on issues facing many private renters has also increased. So whilst we have seen some really welcome improvements in the regulation of the sector for everyone, and there's been really important work, particularly in the Private Tenancies Act, which was passed last year, whilst we have all those improvements, unfortunately, too many renters continue to face problems finding and keeping a home which is affordable, of suitable standard, and meets their needs and the needs of their family. And for this reason, really, about a third of the calls that our advisors here in Housing Rights take every day are from those who rent privately, which is why I think we're particularly pleased at Housing Rights to be supporting work which is about strengthening tenant voice, and why we feel that there's a need for a wider conversation with all of the stakeholders who are engaged in this work. People with experiences of poor housing and homelessness have many insights from their experience that the rest of us don't have, and it's that simple. And that's why the learning from today about how to do this work well is of such relevance to us all. So you're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I want to pass to Josh. Josh, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Kate. It's great to be here. Hi everyone, I'm Josh Davis. I am the Programme Manager for the Transforming the Private Renter Sector programme at the Nationwide Foundation. We are, just for people who don't know, the Nationwide Foundation is a charitable foundation with an aim that there are more decent, affordable homes across the UK. And we have three main programmes, one of which is the Transforming the Private Renter Sector programme. Just checking that I do, yep, I do have control, great. So the first thing I wanted to sort of cover, which Kate's already touched on really, is sorry, it's not moving. There you go. Is why tenant voice? Why have we done this work? Why have we funded this work? So one of the key problems I identified is that tenants often don't have a voice in debates about the private rented sector. This leads to a lot of problems. Firstly, that tenants are basically disempowered, and importantly, that policy and practice may not work in favour of tenants because policymakers and power holders won't know what tenants want. And then, as Kate's mentioned, more widely, better involvement of people with lived experience is something the sector is working on generally, and it's seen as a really important thing at the moment. And we really want tenants to be central to any changes to the private rented sector, as we believe this leads to positive changes in policy and practice. So to do this, we want to help tenants to have greater access to information and advice, greater access to safe places to come together, support to speak up, and the opportunity to work together. And we'd expect to see this enhanced capability leading to an attitudinal shift in the sector. That's our real aim, where tenants feel more confident and empowered, but at the same time, power holders and those people who do actually make the decisions about the private rented sector open up spaces for tenants, and that tenant engagement with power holders becomes the norm for the sector. So what is the Tenant Voice Programme? So we designed this to strengthen the collective voice of private tenants for the reasons I've just said, and so that to make it so that their voices can be used to influence debates in the private rented sector. We provided £1.1 million of funding to 7 organisations across the UK, which have all been running since 2019. And that included local and national organisations, tenants unions, advice organisations, so a real variety, because we wanted to test different approaches to how to do tenant voice work effectively and see what works and where the challenges are. Those projects tested a range of models of how to do tenant voice work. And we wanted to be able to understand the effects of tenants' voice work, help the projects to develop and deliver their work well, so sharing learnings between the different projects, and then generally build learnings about the strengths and challenges of different models in different contexts. So broadly, you could split the models, although they're all unique and have their own strengths and challenges. You could broadly split them into two models. The first of those was a community organising model. And those models aim to engage and mobilise a large group of renters, supporting them to challenge their landlords in personal housing situations and then to collectively call for wider reform. Those models will often have a membership function, meaning they're meant to be owned and directed by the renters they engage with. And just to give the examples of the projects we funded on that, we funded Greater Manchester Tenants Union, Living Rent, which is a charity in Scotland, and it's a tenant organisation in Scotland, and Shelter in Bristol, to work specifically with Bristol. And then alongside those, just been accidentally muted, I think, but I think we're back on now. So alongside those, we have I don't know what's quite going on with the tech, sorry. Can everyone see the presentation as I can see it? Is that all right? I'm assuming everyone's still there.
Yep. Yeah, all good.
Still here.
Good. All right, good. Okay, so alongside those, we have the policy panel models. Those tend to work with a smaller group of core tenants to influence and scrutinise policy. So they're like a sort of a core group of tenants. And they bring them together to share experiences, voice concerns, and then give evidence. Tenants usually engage with the project after receiving housing support from a caseworker at the organisation, so it would be more sort of advice-focused organisations that might use this type of model. And the models we funded, the projects we funded that used this model were Housing Rights, which we'll hear from shortly, and then Z2K, which is a charity in London, and Citizens Advice nationally. And alongside those, we also funded one project that was a mixed model that was Camden Federation of Private Tenants in London. And then just before we come on to hear from Housing Rights, I just wanted to flag that our focus on tenants vulnerable to harm. So in particular, we encourage projects to focus on tenants who are particularly vulnerable to harm in the PRS. We wanted to make sure, of course, that our work was targeted at people who needed the help the most in the private rented sector. However, there was a tension here, as defining tenants as vulnerable is difficult, as it can have negative connotations and potentially disempower people. And also a strict definition can also lead to trying to fit people into boxes that people never do really fit into. So we came up with our own definition of renters vulnerable to harm, and that was those people whose personal characteristics and circumstances mean that they can't avoid the potential problems of living in the private rented sector, putting them at increased risk of harm. And we came up with that definition as we hoped it would allow us to recognise that different people will experience vulnerability at different times and for different reasons. So I'm now really pleased to hand over to some people who've been part of the Housing Rights Project here, and to hear from their first-hand experience of the project.
Thanks, Josh. Josh has put in a really good, useful context the work that Renters Voice has been involved in over the last 3 years, and we're going to go back to Josh in just a moment to talk about the learning. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce Jenny and Brigitte, are two of the tenants who have been involved in Renters Voice, the project that's been funded by the Nationwide Foundation and supported by Housing Rights. And if you're thinking in your head, which of those models that Josh was just talking about does Renters Voice fit into, it's the second, so it's the policy panel model. So without further ado, Jenny and Brigitte, you are very welcome.
Hello. My name is Brigitte. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. And I've been involved in sort of tenants' rights for quite a while. I was in the group that was before Renters Voice, the Private Renters Forum, the Private Tenants Forum, and I came to it in 2014 with a question on security of tenure. And like so many of us at the time, we came with questions. And then I stayed on, and it's been a brilliant journey. I'm originally from Germany, and I grew up in what's sort of called cooperative housing, which was a model that you paid a share in the housing organization, and then you would be getting a flat, which was affordable and secure. And you had duties as well as rights. And there was a lot on tenants, cooperation and participation. And I mean, my parents moved into co-op housing in the 60s. So it's been going for a long time in Germany and also in Austria and Switzerland. And I hand over to Jenny to introduce herself.
Yeah, I'm Jenny. I've been involved with Renters Voice for about 3 years. After randomly completing a survey that was shared on social media at the start of the pandemic, unfortunately they got rather stuck with me, and they're still stuck with me for the foreseeable future. I've been private renting for nearly 8 years, and yeah, that's about the sum of it. If you hear any noise in the background here, I have a dog that's currently trying to beat me up as well, because she hears Brigitte's voice. I'm going to hand back over to Brigitte and try and settle her down.
I'm very flattered. Since I have a bit of techie problems, I just keep saying next slide. So next slide, please. Now, Renters Voice is a project for people renting from a private landlord or letting agent who want to improve things for private tenants in Northern Ireland. We want to build a strong voice for private tenants in Northern Ireland, as well as help build a culture of tenant participation in the development of the private rented sector here. Now, we are funded through Nationwide's Tenant Voice program, and we're also supported by Housing Rights. But our voice is very much our own, and you'll hear that voice quite a bit now. This morning, we are going to take you through the highlights of our work over the past 3 years of the project and share our journey towards making our voice heard. Next slide, please. Now, the project got off with a bang with our first tenants meeting due to be held in March 2020. And that didn't happen, obviously. So we quickly moved online with the rest of the world. And we didn't meet for a long time. So we worked online with the Tenants Voice Coordinator to draft 2 surveys about the impact of COVID-19 on tenants and then met regularly online. In the first year, we also helped shape engagement sessions with other private renters in Northern Ireland to get more people involved in the project. Next slide, please. Having come together as a group in year 1 and navigated the first few months of COVID, we really got stuck into speaking out and influencing changes in year 2. Our key campaign was our Notice to Quit campaign, calling for 6 months notice to quit for tenants, and in the longer term, a move to indefinite tenancies. We made videos explaining what 6 months notice to leave our homes would mean to us, as well as an accompanying paper which we sent to the Minister and Department for Communities. We also promoted our campaign videos on social media. So we learned a lot of how to do a campaign video, which was very good. Next slide, please. Throughout year 2, we submitted written evidence to the Department for Communities in response to their call for evidence on the housing supply strategy and the private tenancies bill. We were pleased that the Communities Committee recognized the value of our voice and experience by inviting us to give oral evidence during their scrutiny of the bill. We outlined to the MLAs on the committee the aspects of the bill we thought were helpful to private renters, and crucially, the aspect we thought needed to change in order to give people the protection they need to keep their homes. For example, we explained why 28 days notice to leave your home simply isn't enough, and explained why we think people should be given 6 months. One of our group members also shared her experience of having to walk to her estate agent with £1,000 in cash, as I would not accept a digital payment, and explained how nervous she had been carrying such a large amount of cash. And I'm looking at you, Jenny, here, in case you want to say anything else.
That was absolutely terrifying. I mean, the agency isn't in a good part of town. When you're carrying that much cash, if someone takes it, what do? You can't go into the agency and say, sorry, actually, I don't have the money. They're not going to still give you the house. That would be before the trauma of any, whether you've lost it, been robbed, or just miscounted and had to walk back and get more. It's absolutely unbelievable. And you know, when places are going cashless, that £1,000 in your handbag down the wrong side of Belfast, really is not a fun experience.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenny. During year 2, 9 group members also completed an OCN Level 2 accredited training course with 2 modules. Understanding the private rented sector in Northern Ireland and understanding tenant participation in the private rented sector. This was a great opportunity for us to build knowledge and confidence when it comes to influencing change in the private rented sector and making our voice heard. And it was really a great learning experience. Next slide, please. In our 3rd year, we continue to engage with the Department for Communities consultations and submitted written response to consultations on notice to quit periods and the draft housing supply strategy. In April 2022, we ran a social media campaign about the local elections here, encouraging people to ask political canvassers a list of questions related to private rented housing issues. Our key campaign in year 3 was about the cost of living crisis. We designed and launched a survey to gauge the impact of the crisis on private renters. We wrote up a report on the findings and sent it to MLAs and the Minister for Communities. We were then invited to Stormont to present our findings at a cost of living crisis event. The tenant who presented our findings at this event was interviewed afterwards by a journalist, and her interview featured on BBC Radio Ulster's On Your Behalf show. We were also invited to present our survey finding at Housing Rights Private Rented Sector Conference, as well as the Chartered Institute of Housing's All Ireland Summit in Derry. Next slide, please. During the year, tenants also represented the group on the Tenancy Deposit Schemes Advisory Board as well as the Department for Communities Working Group on regulations which are coming in under the Private Tenancies Act, where we had the chance to directly influence the information which landlords will now be required to provide tenants at the beginning of their tenancy. We also got creative this year and took part in the Imagine Festival, where we designed an online workshop for private renters to create DIY renters manifestos. And that was great fun. And we have exhibited these manifestos as well at housing conferences. So I now hand over to Jenny for the next part.
Okay. So why is tenants' voice really so valuable? We feel that the value, gosh, I look great. The value of tenants' voice can clearly be seen in the changes that we've helped influence in legislation and practice over the past 3 years. For example, the extension of the notice to quit period for private tenants to 12 weeks during the pandemic using emergency COVID legislation. The private tenancy bill was amended by the Department for Communities to create a power for the department to make provision for tenants to be afforded a range of payment options, which we recommended and was included as new clause 11A in the Act, no more walking down the road with a handbag full of cash. The Act also required that receipts must be provided for all cash payments related to tenancy rather than just rental payments, as per our recommendation. And furthermore, the Act includes provision for the department to extend the notice to quit periods required by private landlords to up to 7 months. Indeed, during the final stages of the bill passing through the Assembly, 3 MLAs from 5 of the main parties made specific reference to the influence that Renters' Voice had on the bill. When we shout loud. Brigida's laughing because she knows quite well. In addition, we directly influenced a number of changes to the new tenancy information regulations, including changing the name of these regulations and accompanying document from a statement of tenancy terms, which we felt was difficult for private renters to understand, to the new title of tenancy information, which makes the purpose of the document, it's just far easier, it's plain English, far easier to understand. We recommended that the regulations included the requirement for a landlord's email address to be provided to tenants, which was included, as well as for the language to be simplified throughout to make the document more accessible, which again was taken on board with more accessible language used throughout the document. As well as those specific changes, we've influenced in legislation and policy documents. The value of our work was recognised last year, as you can see, at the Chartered Institute Housing All Ireland Housing Awards, when we were finalists in the more bricks and mortar category. We unfortunately didn't win, but we were just so delighted. It was like a pinch me moment just to even be there. We just kept, Brigitte and I just kept looking at each other, looking at Carrie and Christine going, what is happening here? It was amazing, absolutely amazing. Brilliant night out. I mean, really worthy winners in every category. So next slide, please. Sorry, the dog. The value and impact of Renters' Voice hasn't just been in terms of the changes that we've influenced, but in terms of the opportunities it's given us as individuals and the group. To give an example, this is so exciting. One of our members has recently secured a job working in London for a housing charity, and he spoke about the importance of tenants' voice and how his Renters' Voice involvement helped him to get there. He commented that too often tenants are seen as powerless and told that we should be grateful to have a home at all. We're told that high rents and a deregulated sector are in our best interest as landlords are providing us with a roof over our heads. Working with Renters' Voice has given us an opportunity to decide for ourselves what's in our best interests and have our voices heard in the same forum and on the same platform as landlords, letting agents and politicians. He went on to say, working with the group allowed me to gain first-hand, in-depth experience engaging with housing law from the perspective of a group most impacted by it and has allowed me to get a job in the housing charity sector. I'm so proud of him. From a personal perspective, Renters Voice is more to me than just a group that meets every other week. Through Renters Voice, I have, believe it or not, once upon a time I was very, very shy and very withdrawal. See everybody at Housing Rights laughing there, going, really? Through Renters Voice, I've learned to advocate for myself, of my landlords, and advocate for other folk. I'm becoming quite well known around Queens as the one that knows about housing. Inbox is brimming constantly. Usually a bit of advice and then always refer on to Housing Rights in case I've told them the biggest pack of nonsense. Hopefully not. I've been great. Gained an incredible amount of confidence in interacting with a huge variety of people, from my activist peers in Renters Voice, government representatives, academics, press. It's led to me sitting on other housing related committees, steering groups, all party groups, and significantly contributed to my decision to apply last year and actually start this year my master's degree. Renters Voice and Housing Rights team, they're not just colleagues, they're my biggest cheerleaders and firm friends. And all this from answering a survey on Renters Voice while I was isolated during COVID. I mean, who knew? Okay, did you want to jump in?
Yeah,
there? Go back.
I have a pretty much similar experience, although I was involved in campaigns before, but I found working with, the Private Tenants Forum first and then Renters Voice, very empowering, supportive, and you grew in skills and knowledge. And one of the things which, although I've been interested in politics, to actually give evidence to an assembly committee, although I wasn't giving the evidence, but just being involved in the process was quite amazing, because when do you ever do that? So that was fantastic. And also, we're all great friends and we kind of rely on each other. If one can't do something, the other one can jump in. Also, I recently got sort of what I call my dream job, and I do think that Renters Voice helped me to get it, because one of the elements involved in the work is housing, and I kind of had the skills and knowledge. What Jenny said as well about people kind of get to know you as the person who knows about tenants' rights. So I've been, especially when I'm on social media, I just keep saying, hello, go to Housing Rights Northern Ireland and check your rights. And then I kind of tell people, and what most people are very, tenants are not aware of is that you cannot just be evicted like that. There is a process. And so I say, look, get advice on the process. You don't have to move like the next day or anything like that. And tenants feel very helpless. There is that feeling that people suddenly get a notice to quit and they're absolutely, shocked. So and really don't and think that this is it. But there are rights and processes. So and that's sort of what we are about as well, to tell people and to say, no, you're not helpless, you can do things. So that has been fantastically empowering. So I hand over back to Jenny for the last bit.
Okay. I feel like your man that was doing the health updates, during the what do you call them? Next slide, please. That's going to annoy me now to remember it. So our future plans. We are so excited about the next phase of Renters Voice as we continue to advocate for the changes that are needed to protect private renters in Northern Ireland. We will be continuing to work to influence the rollout of the Private Tenancies Act. We really could do with people coming back to Stormont and doing their jobs, but however, so to protect private renters in Northern Ireland, we'll be continuing to work to I've just said that, as well as continue our cost of living crisis campaign. We do have a survey out at the minute, so if there's any of you here that are private renting, pop onto some of our social media and fill out that survey for us, or any clients or whatever. Would be really, really, really grateful. We are really determined to build upon our work so far. It's been an incredible couple of years, but we've still got so much more to achieve, and I believe we will. We're going to make, sorry, excuse me, I choked on absolute dinner, to make sure that diverse voices are heard, not just one sector. The amazing thing with Renters Voice is that organically we are actually a really diverse group of folk with different issues, different specialities. And we're going to be working with the decision makers to help them to understand how to meaningfully involve tenants. I mean, a lot of the time it's well and good saying we need to include tenants here, but we need them to hear from tenants how best to do that. So watch this space. We are always open to new members. You don't always have to be a bit of a head case like me. Yeah, you don't have to be mad here, but it helps. But if you know anybody that's private rent and that really wants to learn how to make a change or to affect change, send them our way, even just for chat. We are really quite tame at the start, aren't we, Amy? She's there. So I'm going to stop talking and pass you to back to Kate. I think, is it? Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you, Brigida, as well, for that really interesting and uplifting. It's nice to have hope, and Renters Voice gives me hope a lot of the time about how we can shape things, how we can move them forward, and the great work that's happening here. Speaking of hope, I'm going to pass you back now to Josh, who is going to talk about the learning from across all of the projects that have been funded under the Tenants Voice programme. And I think that's a bit that a lot of us will be looking forward to hear. So Josh, over to you.
Thanks very much, Kate, and thanks so much to Jenny and Brigitte there. Really, really great to hear about the work you've been doing, and also really impressively to time as well. That was like perfectly to time. So I'm very impressed. I don't think I'll manage that so perfectly. But yeah, thanks so much. It was really interesting. And now you're back to me for the boring bit. So I just wanted to sort of cover more broadly across all the projects what we found out. I don't think I need to say too much more at a top level than what Jenny and Brigitte have already said in terms of the amount of impact that this type of work can have. But generally, what they've said was seen across the projects. So there was so much achieved across all the projects, increasing renters' knowledge of their rights, developing tenant manifestos written by renters, mobilising tenants to contribute to consultations and policy responses, producing media outputs such as podcasts, reports, articles, and most importantly, securing commitments to change from local, regional and national governments. Of course, the pandemic had an impact as well on all the projects, as they mentioned, but generally the projects were able to adapt to that and shift how they were working with tenants. So moving on to sort of headline findings of our report. So we evaluated the success of this work and found effectively that the projects had achieved against 4 main goals and had done so in different ways depending on the type of model that they'd used. So I'll just go into sort of the strengths of the different models now. So firstly, the project supported tenants to have a stronger voice in personal, local, regional and national decision making on renting. Community organising models, which you'll remember just a few minutes ago I mentioned, aim to engage and mobilise a larger group of renters and support them to challenge landlords and collectively call for reforms. So those models worked to build tenants' understanding of their individual rights, and that was a first step in developing their confidence to campaign for an expansion of these rights. At the same time, those models demonstrated the volume of renters and their collective need for reform to political decision makers, and that was an effective way to incentivize those decision makers to engage with renters by demonstrating the scale of the problem that there was. And alongside that, the policy panel models, one of which we've just heard from, they achieved this goal by facilitating groups of renters to navigate, understand and inform policy making, so making it less complex and more accessible. I think any of us who've engaged with private rented sector tenancy law can find it a bit hard to understand. They also brought the voice of tenants to policymakers. So setting up direct conversations between those two groups, and ensured that the detail of policies and their implementation reflected real experiences and power imbalances that renters experience. And then the second key achievement of the projects was to support the participation of tenants vulnerable to harm. So I mentioned earlier that was one of our key goals. Community organising models did that by supporting renters' rights through longer term projects and working with local community groups and leaders, which are key to building trust with those communities that might have been particularly marginalised in the past. And also they did that by creating safe spaces for tenants to share their experiences without feeling that it would go any further, and allowing them to speak out anonymously. And then alongside that, policy panel models achieved this goal by listening to and platforming the voices of the most vulnerable to ensure that reform will account for the specific challenges they face in the PRS and improve their position. They built trust with groups that have experience of discrimination and exclusion from the system. And then thirdly, the key goal achieved was to build tenants' skills, knowledge, leadership and advocacy, which was a really important aim of the projects. So community organising models, again, facilitated collective and peer-to-peer advice and support for individual tenants to exercise their rights with their landlords, building tenants' voice and their advocacy skills at the same time. They also provided collective support for individual tenants to challenge their letting agents, which importantly can lead to wider change in practice if a letting agent, manages a lot of properties, or if it becomes known about in an area that a particular issue has been raised. Alongside that, policy panel models built the confidence and skills of a core group of tenants who can influence and advocate for policy change. And they encourage tenants to see their experiences as reflecting a broader systemic injustice, which they can fight through policy change. And there's a quote there that just demonstrates that tenants started to understand that the poor treatment they had received was poor treatment, whereas previously they might not have recognised that this wasn't something that should be occurring. And lastly, the key goal, the key achievement of the projects was to build sustainable tenant voice and participation. Community organising models did that by encouraging peer-to-peer support and building a self-sustaining model for tenant voice, so something that was led by tenants and owned by the tenants that were part of it. They drew attention to tangible changes and individual successes achieved by tenant movements to do that. And then the policy panel models did this by recruiting and developing representative tenant groups and building a core group that can be sustained despite turnover in members. Of course, alongside all these successes, there were inevitably challenges, and the main ones we saw with community organising models was that it could be difficult to build a diverse and representative group for organising. It often required intentional efforts to bridge across communities and build relationships. So some projects just struggled to engage with particular communities through a variety of reasons, and that needed a real long-term focused effort to do so. Also, these models particularly struggled during the pandemic because they're based on the need to engage with a large group of renters. Obviously, it wasn't possible through large parts of the pandemic, and many grant holders found it challenging to build relationships across a community and rally them for collective change online. And then the key challenges experienced by policy panel models was really the slow progress of policy change. It's hard for any of us, I think, to be constantly motivated and engaged with the pace of policy change, and when we also, can see problems that are currently happening. And that was a struggle for the tenants engaged too, because and for the staff to stay motivated without seeing any tangible change or quick wins. And alongside that, the pandemic also presented challenges, not so much in being able to engage with tenants, but because it absorbed political attention. So, policymakers were focused on other things. And lastly, I want to talk about the assumptions that we had going into the program and how we tested those and what we learned more broadly about sort of doing work on tenant voice. So we started with several assumptions about the program and its possible impact for tenants. The first of these was that if tenants have a stronger voice at a local level, this will lead to change at a local, regional and national level. That was one of our sort of key assumptions going in. What we found is that while local level voice can be a force for change at an individual and local level, doesn't necessarily translate to broader change at a wider level unless it's mobilized effectively. So it's not enough to simply give tenants a stronger voice. They need support to speak to the power holders and to influence policy itself. And at the same time, power holders need to be willing to listen. And the quote at the bottom there just demonstrates that there's a need for more than just a voice. You need hope, commitment, strategy, and action to build power. Our second assumption was that achieving a stronger voice for tenants will lead to reform that benefits all tenants, including the most vulnerable. So I've mentioned that a few times now. And we found that it isn't necessarily the case that a change that benefits some tenants will benefit them all. While tenant voice is essential in shaping the detail of policies themselves and their implementation, reform doesn't necessarily always benefit the most vulnerable, because the tenants most vulnerable to harm can face barriers that result in unique experiences in the private rented sector, and there's a greater power imbalance and higher risks for them, and so changes just might not reach them. So you can't target the sort of average tenant when you're making these changes. You need to listen to the experiences and needs of the most vulnerable as well. Our third assumption was that if more tenants successfully challenge their landlords or letting agent on their personal housing situations, that will contribute to improving private rented sector practice on the ground. What we found was that supporting individual challenges are really important for tenant empowerment and for making tenants feel like, you know, they have a voice and they understand their rights. And that can support policymakers also to understand the experiences of renters and how policy is implemented on the ground. Importantly as well, a challenge didn't necessarily need to be like successful to achieve that impact. It was just that it put the issue on the agenda. However, at the same time, we also need to be mindful of the potential for wider systemic impact of any challenge, of any individual challenge. Projects found that challenges to individual landlords were less impactful than those to letting agents or landlords with many properties, as I mentioned previously. And our last key assumption was as I've already mentioned a few times now, it's one of our key things, was how to engage effectively with tenants vulnerable to harm. Grant holders agreed that targeting renters who are most vulnerable to harm required long-term and flexible projects which are embedded within communities they were trying to reach. You need to do it for a long time. You need to build trust with groups that have a long-term experience of discrimination and exclusion from a system, and it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to meet tenants where they are. And so lastly, just to cover off sort of what's next, as has been mentioned, we're continuing to fund phase 2 of the Tenant Voice programme because the work's obviously not done. We've also published a report and a toolkit which sets out in more detail what I've just gone through there, and has more detailed recommendations on how to effectively do tenant voice work and different ways you might want to do it. Please do get in touch with me if you'd like to discuss further. You can find the report on our website, and also please do follow us on Twitter at Nationwide Foundation. And that's everything from me, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Josh, thank you very much. And you kept very well to time as well, after all you're saying that you wouldn't. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to see that whilst you've been speaking, Josh, there have been some connections happening between some of the participants in the chat function there. And that's what today is all about, kind of sharing the learning and looking for opportunities to work together to strengthen the voice of people whose voices often aren't heard and the decisions that are being made. Loads to pick up on, I think, from all of the presentations today. I made a few notes as you were all talking there. But I suppose at this stage, I'd just like to invite any comments or questions from anyone who's on the call this morning. I can see a message there. There's quite a lot of messages coming through just in praise of the work that's happening. There's a message from Rebecca at the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, which is another brilliant project that's talking about the amazing work that's taken place and hope that it continues, which definitely will. And as Josh kind of finished there, the work isn't done. There's a lot more to do. I know that some of the members of the Renters' Voice Advisory Group, which is a collection of stakeholders who are working in the sector, who really want to support the project. Some of the members of that group are also on the call. And just if they or anyone else had any initial comments before we move to questions, you're very welcome to make them. Everyone's very shy. All right, well, if there's no first comments, maybe I can use Chair's prerogative then to pick a few things up.
Could I speak, Kate? Sorry, I was on mute there. Sorry, I couldn't get off that.
No, you're fine, Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, I'm from Community Advice in Armagh, and I was very impressed with your contribution from your two renters, Jenny and Brigitte. I'd never heard of Renters' Voice, I'll be honest. We have obviously been dealing a lot with housing rights, and we get a lot of private tenants in with complaints in relation to housing, the way the landlords are treating them, environmental issues around, you know, safety and notice to quit, you know, just lots of variations. But I was just going to ask, is the Renters' Voice, is that an online forum, or is there a local organisation in Armagh or anywhere around, or how do we, you know, connect people?
Yeah, we're sort of hybrid at the minute. We were completely online because of the pandemic. We only actually all met in person for the first time last Christmas.
All right.
We kind of had a bit of a poke and going, oh gosh, you're actually real. But mostly online, but we do meet up every so often, and we usually would use housing rights offices for the skiing us.
Okay.
Sorry, kid, I was relocating you there for meetings, so
Very good.
so we try to like keep it as accessible for as many people as possible. So we're not all Belfast based. So very
yeah, the social policy, we would obviously put in some considerations for social policy, would send that to advice and but now we know your forum and obviously housing rights we can use as well, so thank you for that.
Absolutely, Michelle. And Kerry Logan, who's on the call, is our participation and policy coordinator. She could maybe pick up with you outside of this, just to share a bit more about the work that Renters' Voice are doing and how you might be able to engage a bit further. Paddy, Professor Paddy Gray, you were trying to come in there. Paddy Gray is, well, he's lots of things, recognised as an expert in all the fields, but to Renters' Voice, he is the chair of the advisory group. Paddy, thanks for joining us. You wanted to come in there?
Yes, Kate, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
I'm actually over in Glasgow at the moment at Whitley Housing, so but I mean, as you know, that Glasgow has a good private rented tenants voice as well. Just what Michelle was saying there, that, you know, from Armagh, not that because I'm from Armagh originally myself, but the fact that, you know, that it's something that has been, I suppose, growing over the last couple of 2 or 3 years since the project was first funded by Nationwide. And we've had our ups and downs, and the main one was COVID, obviously. And we had been meeting in person up until that, and then we had a change of leadership as well during that. So, you know, we've had stumbling blocks, but despite that, the project has been going very, very well. And again, the response to Michelle, we are keen to encourage as many people as possible to get involved in whatever way they can. Now, we do obviously have the physical meetings in Belfast, but, you know, there will be online forums as well. And we had talked about possibly having sessions in the Northwest or maybe in Mid-Ulster or something that perhaps people could attend. So we're really welcome anyone who's listening to this today or knows anyone else who wants to get involved in the project to please come ahead, and they'll be embraced, and we will value any sort of support that we can get.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Paddy. Kerry, do you want to come in at this stage? This might be an opportune time to talk about some work that Housing Rights are doing to support more people to get involved with Renters' Voice, and particularly picking up on the point that Josh had made around people whose personal characteristics or their circumstances might make them more vulnerable to issues in the private rented sector. Do you want to just give us a wee sort of 30-second update on kind of our plans or thinking around that?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kate. I'm just beavering away messaging people in the chat, and actually I'll just fire my email address to everybody, I think, because it's been really great to make some connections with particular groups that we are hoping to work more closely with and to get involved in Renters Voice. I've just messaged Michelle to reiterate that we're really keen to make sure that the project is Northern Ireland wide, and that there's ways for people to get involved who don't live in Belfast, particularly because there's specific issues faced by, for example, private renters living in more rural communities. So over the next phase of the project, we will be reaching out to lots of different groups, particularly those who are particularly vulnerable to harm in the private rented sector, not only to see if they're interested in getting involved in the project, but also to work with them as to how they'd like to be involved, and how we can maybe move forward as a group to make sure that it is accessible to everybody. Also really great to be connecting in this morning with Rebecca from the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, as young people are another group that we're keen to reach out to and to get involved in the project. So basically we'll be, over the next sort of 6 months, we're going to be looking at how to reach out and engage with lots of different demographics and groups of people living in private rented accommodation. So really keen to connect with anybody in the call who has ideas about how we could link in. And yeah, that's our plan of action for the next while, but really encouraged by the connections today.
Great, Kerry, thanks so much. I'm just looking at the chat there because I don't want to miss any comments that are coming through. Peter O'Callaghan has said they're happy to send Renters Voice promotion materials to all of the tenants and to encourage engagement and membership in the Armagh, Belfast and Derry areas. That's really helpful, thank you. James, I'd seen a message from yourself. James, your message was about estate agent fees, which I know was a huge issue for the Private Tenants Forum, who were kind of the predecessor to Renters Voice, and they had done some mystery shopping which helped inform a legal case around this. And I suppose your question is around how can we sort of enforce proper regulation around this issue. And I know that there remains to be improvements in legislation around the regulation of letting agents, and around this issue about letting fees as well. There needs to be legislation brought forward. It's slightly complex because it kind of falls between two departments, and a joint communique was issued by both departments a number of years ago around this issue. So really it's about the next stage in the reform, which obviously we need an assembly for. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that particular point. I know, Karen, you're there from the department, if you wanted to say anything about it, or Brigitte or Jenny, just to pick up on
I was going to come in on something else, but I see Jan is here, I think, because we're talking about people vulnerable to harm, and you know, the next really big issue will be private renting. It is already a big issue for older people, because it was very hard to get adaptations or even housing for, you know, older private tenants. And that, you know, even adaptation like a stair lift, if there's no lift.
For like younger people with disabilities.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
I've had OT out and they've made recommendations, but if your landlord doesn't give the go ahead, you know, you're stuck. And there are very few adaptable houses out there anyway, so it's, oh gosh, it's years worth of work, that one as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm climbing over my bath to get to the shower. You know, I climb into the bath, and I'm thinking, well, I can still do this, but there may be a time when I'm not getting over the bathtub. So if I'm still in the same place, you're thinking, that's going to be interesting. Little things.
Out of the bath, I can get in, it's no problem. It's getting out with the other hip. It's like sort of launch yourself towards the wall and hope you
Great, thanks Jenny and Brigitte for that. I see we have another comment coming through there from a contributor. It's from Aidan Hayden in the south, talking about how relevant the work that's happening in the north is to the south, not just in the private rented sector, but also the social rented sector. And I think that's something that we're seeing in our work as well, that there's an opportunity to work together to improve the housing sector more broadly. I wanted, because we only have a few minutes left, to put a question to each of our panelists, so to Josh, to Jenny and to Brigida. It's really a reflection around how much positive support there is in this virtual room that we have today for participation. And I wondered if each of you could give me one thing that you think that other stakeholders could do to provide more space to private renters. How can we take advantage of all the support that there is here for participation in the private rented sector? Is there one thing that you think in your experience or in the learning across the board that could be done to strengthen the voice of private tenants? Josh, I'm going to come to you first.
Oh no, you put me on the spot first.
Sorry.
For one thing as well, I know. I suppose like for us at the moment, we feel like, you know, and I think it's reflected here that over the last few years, tenants' voice has been expanded in a lot of areas, and there is like a real feeling that it's can be of value. And there are like tenants there who, you know their rights, they want to use them. And I think now what we're really trying to do, particularly with sort of the second phase of the work, is encourage those who have power, who can make the decisions, to really listen to the tenants. And I think that's obviously kind of can be a harder thing to achieve, particularly, you know, with politics as it is at the moment. But I suppose that's the main thing. I suppose for me, it would be encouraging power holders to actually pay attention to the tenants that are there, you know, that want to say something, that want to give their views, and letting power holders understand that that'll improve the policies that they make, that'll improve the way the private rental sector operates.
Thanks, Josh. Jenny and Brigida, which of you would like to go first?
I'm sort of still thinking, but I think one of the things is that people often in decision-making position and private renters, a lot of people still think about home owners, and that's sort of the norm. But there is more private renters out there, and also it's not just students. I mean, people sometimes, they're surprised that I'm a private renter. They're always saying, you know, they look at me and thinking, you know, basically she's old enough to have a house, but no, you know, more about money. You know, so I think even thinking of private renters and then also listen to us is the big one. You know, I think, you know, we're still not, we're visible, but I think in the consciousness sort of, there seem to be mostly homeowners. People always think about homeowners rather than private renters. And also a lot of the groups who used to be in social housing have been pushed into the private rented sector because there isn't any social housing. That's the other issue. So really, I think, yeah, think of private renters, I think, and think about the families and the older people and people with disabilities and people who are not from here. You know, that those people who haven't got a house or their own flat. That's sort of what came into my head.
Jenny, do you have any reflections about how stakeholders can play their part to strengthen the voice of private tenants?
I think a lot of the time, as soon as you say rental, people think landlord. They don't think tenant. You know, and there's a lot of discussion going on when up with these vouchers, but landlords claim them, landlords this, landlords that. You go, no, the tenants are here. These are, you know, the landlord owns this building. Fantastic. You know, I'm fairly lucky with my landlord at the minute. She's quite amenable, but you know, you take a trade that this is, you're lucky to have a home or a roof over your head. I mean, I'm in private rent because there was no social housing available. I was looking at another year or 2 years of homelessness, living in a hostel to get a 1-bedroom flat for me and 3 children, which is just not. But yeah, no, listen, you know, don't do what you think needs done. Come and ask us. What do we think needs done? What really matters to the tenants?
Great, thank you, Jenny. I see a comment coming in from Karen at the department, just echoing the praise around the renter's voice there and saying that how much the department has appreciated input from Renters' Voice in the Private Tenancies Act and the regulations. And we have another comment coming in thick and fast. You can't keep up. From Annabelle there, who's working with the Scottish Government. And I just think there's so much opportunity, I think, for all of us to work really closely together, and so much learning around this. Jan has her hand up. Jan, I'm going to come to you in just a second, just to say, to finish that point around what can stakeholders do, because there was an event that Housing Rights recently hosted, and there was a lot of roundtable discussions about participation and about what we can do, and there were some threads of discussion there around you know, stakeholders needing resources to be able to support effective and meaningful involvement, like people really wanting to do this and wanting to do it well, but needing support, both financial and support about how to do it, what the best way to do it would be. So we're very happy to share some of the documentation, some of the reports that came from that, because I really feel that this is a very important emerging discussion. It's clear today there's so many people interested in and so many people supportive of this work. Jan, you have been one of the founding members of Renters' Voice and the Private Tenants Forum before then. What would you like to say, Jan? You're on mute. You've got your hand up. Jan, are you there? Got your hand up. Maybe it's an accidental hand up.
Hello,
right.
Yes, can you hear?
Yes, Jan,
Yeah.
I can hear you. There you are. You have a final word, Jan.
I see that Karen Barr from the department is acknowledging the work that Renters' Voice has done, and saying that they will continue to work with us. The problem is, of course, that we're working with so many different groups, organisations, and the department. But finally, any legislation here has to go through the Assembly, and there is no Assembly, and there's been no Assembly for a year, and no Assembly in immediate prospect. So by the time, I think we've all got to have a really strong message in place for expectations for housing generally across the whole housing sector, and particularly, of course, in our case for private tenants, to put to candidates so that we know what kind of policies they're going to take into whatever political
Jan, your call quality is dropping off there slightly.
Really
but
getting a very strong.
Yeah, Jan, your call quality is dropping off slightly there, but I think we got the message, and it's a good message for us to end on today, because really it's about the work that we all can do to ensure that when our assembly, when our legislature is back up and running, we have the answers in place about what change needs to happen. So that's a challenge for us, to go away and do the work so that when our assembly is back up and running, we know the changes that need to be put in place. Thank you all so much. We're 2 minutes over time, so I'm going to let you go on. We'll follow up, and just to echo that the nationwide report that Josh mentioned is available on their website, and we can send out a link to it as well. Thank you all so much for your contribution. Thanks, everyone.